Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an exciting special edition of the ATACS podcast. It is October 17th, 2019, and this is a spoiler cast for Fire Emblem Three Houses. And the word spoiler cast means there will be spoilers. We will talk about anything and everything related to Fire Emblem Three Houses and the story and the characters and where the game goes. So this is your one warning up front. This will be a no holds barred spoiler zone. And with that, let's introduce our panel here. I am your host today, Flex, representing the Golden Deer. Joining me, we have Ryan from New York, representing the Blue Lions. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going good. I will kill you all.
Jesus.
I don't know if I can do a Dimitri. He's just way too hardcore for me.
Yeah, I mean, you got your eye patch and your long gangly hair, and also, and rounding out the trio is Nate from Clayton, North Carolina, representing the Black Eagles. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, howdy, hi.
And I wanted to mention that during the introductions because, fortunately, with our three panelists here, each of us has played through the game once, I believe, and each of us chose a different house. So we have pretty good representation of the three different routes, because one of the interesting things about this game is, I'm sure everyone knows, you pick a house, one of the three houses at the beginning, and roughly the first half of the game, I think, is pretty similar between each house, the only real difference being the characters you start with. But the back half of the game, the story can diverge, and we are kind of fortunate to have one person who played each of the three houses. So,
yeah. And speaking of which, I mean, we didn't really discuss a structure or anything for the podcast, but one of the things that has excited me about having a spoiler cast, and one of the things I thought might be a good first topic, is possibly even just diving into like the way that some of the houses played out. Because as I was playing through like the Blue Lions, for example, and you come into conflict with the other houses, or the other houses maybe like help you out or form uneasy alliances. I kind of wondered, I was like, surely this can't be the same. Like it can't be the same story told from three different perspectives. There actually have to be like pretty big story divergences. And just from the little bit we've talked, it actually sounds like that extends all the way to like having different final bosses and I guess different like goals. So that was even more than I originally expected. But it is one thing that has always kind of tickled the back of my mind while I was playing, is like, I wonder what the other houses are doing right like at this point.
Yeah, because it seems like, at least in my playthrough, it seemed like who would be these other who would make these choices.
And I think it is. So I mean, the game plays out over 18 to 22 chapters depending on which route you take, and the first 11 or so are basically 10 or 11 are the same, but after that there's a 5-year time jump and dramatic things happen, and I think after that it can diverge pretty wildly. Like, I don't think, as Ryan said, you're not seeing the same story from different perspectives. Like, the story plays out differently. Like,
which I think is weird, kind of. Like, I kind of wish it was just the same story from three perspectives, and there's some of that for sure. But like, it's not 100% different, but it does feel like, in order to make you feel like your choice was the right one, maybe they maybe fudge some things.
Are you saying that your choice was the right one?
Oh, well,
have you seen Edelgard?
That's fair. I don't think that Edelgard is necessarily the paragon.
But to Nate's point, whichever house you pick, you end up being the victorious house.
Right.
And you end up being the house that comes out on top in the war that follows the time jump. And it is an interesting choice because it's like all three, like, I mean, this game operates in a lot of gray, and like all three of the houses kind of have a different view on how to go about things, and which house you choose, it kind of bears out that like, all right, our method is the one that won out. Whether it's quote unquote right or wrong, it's kind of the one that bore out and will drive the future of Fodlan.
Yeah, and when that stuff works, I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just a meta point, you know, I was doing a little bit of a write-up and kind of reflecting on the game, on Three Houses, and, you know, it's somewhat of a similar structure to what they did in Fire Emblem Fates. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there are any like older games that, you know, I'm not entirely familiar with some of the older Fire Emblems, but like the time skip stuff, I know it goes back as far as like Genealogy of the Holy War on SNES. So that's actually not even new, but I actually do think that as sort of a meta point, the split structure works. This kind of, you know, choose your path split story structure works pretty well for Fire Emblem games, because from my perspective, like the strength of Fire Emblem storytelling tends to be around its characters and like the heroes, and kind of their interpersonal, you know, interactions. And, you know, the overarching plot, some have been good, some have been kind of, I think they struggle with villains somewhat, but I think this kind of split structure actually really helps the Fire Emblem series, because you usually spend time with characters, you know, in some form or fashion. You spend time with characters, you know, who are sort of like maybe your students or your classmates, or, you know, in Fates, it was the people, you know, from kind of like the household that raised you versus the household that kind of like, you know, you're adopted by or whatever. And you spend time with these different people, and then you have to make a choice where suddenly they become the enemy. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, whereas I found that some of the Fire Emblem games have a real weakness in their villains, I think this split structure actually, you know, maybe not for every game, but when they do it, it actually usually works pretty well, because, you know, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it was kind of more impactful when I was like going onto a battlefield and having to go toe to toe with like Bernadetta or Lorenz or like these characters who I had even thought about recruiting. You know, maybe I just didn't have time, or I didn't get on it quickly enough. And then it's like, okay, well now this person is trying to kill me, or, you know, I have to kill them to like, you know, to advance past this battlefield. Like that, sometimes that was actually like, you know, it's a game and everything, but it's like, you know, that's a really effective, that's a lot more weighty than like killing some twirly mustache, you know, or some nameless dragon that appears out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, the reason it worked so much better for me in Three Houses than in what I played of Fates was that I feel like it did give 3 sets of heroes that you interact with, and then 2 of those 3 sets become your adversaries, and they all felt like people who you got to know and who felt personally like they were justified in whatever actions they were taking, right? Yeah. In Fates, when I played that, I was like, oh, these are the bad guys, and you could side with them if you want, but they're the bad guys.
Yeah. Three Houses does, I think, a much better job at portraying everyone as real people that operate in more realms of gray. And I think that first 10 to 11 chapters where everyone's on the same page in the monastery is really great for that, because you're just interacting with everyone as equals. Like there's like all of the characters of the 3 houses are all on the quote unquote good side. And like that, like Nate said, lets you get to know them before kind of the split happens. Whereas in Fates, like the split was immediate and everyone on the other side was a cartoonish villain right from the jump.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you spend like, it's much more abbreviated. You spend like 2 chapters with each house, like, because you start out in Nor, and then you you go visit Hoshido or whatever, and you're like, oh, hey, this is actually where I was raised or whatever. But yeah, the point is well taken. Like you have way more time to
But at the same time, in Three Houses, the actual choice you make about which house you pick is incredibly early.
Yeah.
And
And
you don't get to choose when the war actually starts who you're going to side with. You already made that choice 20 hours ago.
Yeah. And I go back and forth on that a little bit of like, I feel like when you make that choice, you just don't know enough about the houses.
No, not at all.
But at the same time, I think all the houses are worthwhile. And I feel like everyone I've talked to about this game has like come out of it really. Maybe Nate will be an exception to this. I'm not sure, but everyone I've talked to thus far has enjoyed the house they picked. So it's like you're not necessarily in the way we talked about, like there's no real true good or bad, quote unquote. It's like every house kind of has their own story that's worth seeing, and you're not making a moral choice in the house you choose necessarily.
No, you're not.
It is interesting, yeah, because another thing, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but it was a little tough to suss out some of the other characters, like, because you don't see a lot of their like support conversations and things like that. You just kind of like chat with them, and you chat them up in the monastery every now and then. But I did find that as it got closer to like the time jump, that there were actually a few characters who had kind of like grown on me. Like, I recruited Petra towards the end, which her dialogue always cracked me up. But like, Raphael, for example, like at first I was like, what is this guy? But then like towards the end, I was like, every time I have a conversation with him, it kind of makes me chuckle. So it's like, there were definitely some characters towards the time jump where it was like, man, I wish I'd had time to recruit that person, like, and, learn more about them, see some of their support conversations or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think the time spent with everyone together is almost the perfect length, at least for a first playthrough. I'd be curious in subsequent playthroughs, but for a first playthrough, and it sounds like my experience is mirroring Ryan's in a sense of like, you get just enough interaction with the other characters to like start getting a sense of their personality, but not so much that you know everything about them. So then like when you meet them on the battlefield later, it's like, oh, I kind of have a sense of this person, what this person's about. It's a shame I didn't get to know them better, and now we're fighting.
Yeah, it almost makes you think about like in this war setting, like, oh, the people that I don't really know as well, I don't know their motives as much, we've ended up coming to blows. And like obviously it doesn't work this way from a game structure perspective, but like you kind of have that thought of like, maybe if we all just understood each other a little better, this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah. I mean,
which is like a really good like narrative structure.
Yeah. And to your point, like, I mean, I was really passive about recruiting, and towards the end I was like, man, I think I probably could have gotten like 2 or 3 more students. And the students you recruit, you do not have to fight. I don't know if they would have normally shown up. I think a couple of them probably would have. But yeah, I believe that the people you recruit, they join your house as heroes, and like you don't have
generally speaking, that's true.
Yeah, they don't
characters.
Yeah, if you recruit them, they're in your house, and you don't fight them post-war. They get replaced on the battlefield by like some generic named person who has like similar stats to what then like class to what they would have had, but they just get substituted with like a generic soldier.
I didn't realize that. That explains why there were a couple of like people with names who I had like very little understanding of like, why is this person here?
Yeah. But I kind of want to echo something Nate said, because I think this is actually one of the themes in the game and how it handles its structure of the 3 different houses and choosing the different sides, and the way the story plays out is being kind of like, an alternate timeline kind of take on what happens. And I feel like the game doesn't necessarily portray any of the houses as quote unquote the good or bad ones. And I feel like one of the themes it tries to portray is that so much conflict between humans comes from misunderstanding and not taking the time to understand each other.
Yes.
And that kind of echoes from what Nate said of like, oh, what if we had just gotten to know each other a little better? And you see that a lot also in like the historical bits that come up in like whether you're reading stuff in the library or you hear talks about like Dusker or Almyra or stuff that happened long ago with the Nemesis and all that stuff. And like you hear a lot about this in that world's history of just like conflict arising from people not taking the time to get to know each other and understand each other. And
yeah,
I think that's
and
really
just from different classes of people and different nationalities of people who don't have that familiarity and end up coming to conflict. And that is absolutely my favorite thing in this game.
Yeah. And it even comes through. Yeah. And that's one of my favorite things too. And it even comes down on very small interpersonal levels. Cause like, so I did Golden Deer. So I had Lawrence and I recruited Dorothea from the Black Eagles, and their support conversations with each other were one of my favorites in the games, because Lawrence like starts the game as this really like haughty noble who like he doesn't necessarily like he's not quite so extreme of like, oh, nobles are better people than everyone else, but he's like he like has this sense that like nobles come from a different world than commoners, and they have different goals and different expectations, and it's a different world that's incompatible. So he kind of like dismisses commoners a lot on that front of like, we're just from different worlds. So like, I just have no business with you. I don't want to deal. I don't want to deal with your daily concerns.
Agree to disagree. We're just different, right? Like, right.
And Dorothea like constantly gives him crap for that, because she's a commoner, and like Dorothea is one of my favorite characters because she doesn't take crap from anyone and sticks up for herself.
Yeah, and she's super sharp, and she'll just really put people on their heels. Out of nowhere.
She's hilarious. She like verbally eats into people all the time, and she should choose people out, and like So like she didn't like Lawrence to start with, because she's like, why do you think you're better than us? Like, just because you were born with noble blood or whatever. And like so that's their starting point. And through their support conversations, they come to actually be good friends and like understand each other more. And of course, a lot of their dialogue is about like noble versus commoner, that dynamic. Yeah. And like I thought that was a really good support like string, and they end up meeting in the middle, and they come to understand each other and be friends, and it's like that feeds into that theme even on that like interpersonal level with the support conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a similar relationship built into the Black Eagle house with Ferdinand, who is also kind of
I think every house
his own ass noble.
Yeah, I think every house has their one like that.
But he's a little different from Lorenz, where he doesn't like use he does in a different way use his nobility to look down on commoners, but his whole shtick is basically like, nobles are here to help, and we are gonna use our power for good, and we're gonna go out and we're gonna do good deeds, and we're gonna be heroic nobles. And
right.
It's just like the most annoying.
Yeah, he's really got his head up his butt.
Yeah. And so him and Dorothea have a lot of clashes.
Oh, I'm sure.
In that.
Yeah.
Where she just like messes with him a lot. She'll just like send him off on random tasks because he'll do it because he thinks it's his duty as a noble. And then she'll just like chastise him for it.
That's hilarious.
It is interesting. I didn't get quite as much of a sense. I mean, I guess there was some of like obviously there was some sense of understanding or misunderstanding or whatever, especially when you were kind of coming to blows with your classmates. You're like, why are things like this? But I think there were some other themes as well of like what stirred the pot to cause this war.
Well, sure.
Crests was a big one. And I think with the Blue Lions, I saw a little bit less of the like, in some cases, like I know some of the houses, I know crests were kind of a big thing of like the nobility pretty much, a crest was a sort of a burden as well as like a boon.
That's a whole other theme of the game of like the noble lines have the blood of the progenitor of God's children or whatever, that bestow upon them crests, and then that plays into like power structures of Fodlan, and like why are they the ones that get like have power and all this other stuff, and the crests are wild.
And that leads into social structures like, marriages between families trying to like build a crest for the next generation of their noble house, and like it's
all of that stuff causes conflict, to Ryan's point.
Right.
Yeah. And I got a sense that, that was a big thing that stirred the pot, somewhat because of misunderstandings or looking down. But, in some cases, like House Gautier, like Sylvain's house, like they lived on a border state and were constantly in conflict. And so like having a strong heir with a crest was like sort of like a tactical necessity for them.
Right. Because the crests are not just like a societal power. They are literally a manifestation of like divine power that makes that person strong and powerful and able to wield special weapons. Yeah,
and that's the point I forgot to mention earlier is it enables them to wield the powerful weapons called relics. So like it is power in the very physical sense of like they're just stronger people.
Yeah, which is also kind of crazy.
Yeah, and so in some senses, like some of the conflicts, like I didn't get a deep perspective on, because a lot of the gameplay takes place and you're like in the organization, the Church of Saros, and Saros was apparently this ancient hero, but she...
You want to know who Saros is?
I guess.
Rhea is Saros.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So you get a big... So I was curious because my assumption was neither of your routes got this info dump. The last 2 chapters of the Golden Deer route, you get just a giant info dump about all this stuff. And
that's one of the things.
I definitely knew that Rhea was Saros. That definitely comes up in the Black Eagles playthrough.
It's funny. I did not see that at all. Rhea was missing.
I think the 4th route, so there's actually, for anyone not aware, there's actually 4 routes in the game. The Black Eagles route, when you get to which I want to ask Nate some questions on this in a minute. When you get to the part where Edelgard reveals she's the Flame Emperor, if you're in the Black Eagles route, you get to choose, okay, do you want to follow Edelgard or stick with the church? So there's a 4th route that people call, quote unquote, the church route. And that's when you stick with the church from the Black Eagles.
Right.
So we don't have that perspective. I think you get a lot of the same info you get in the Golden Deer route. I think you also get in that route, the church route.
Okay.
But obviously none of us played that. But yes, Rhea, once you save her from Edelgard, she eventually gives you this big story dump about how she's Saros, and she actually goes into details about how the crests and the relics were formed and are passed down. So the relics are literally, so she is Saros, is the children of one of the children of the progenitor god, who is Sothis, who kind of inhabits you from the start of the game. And Sothis, the progenitor god, and all her children, the crests reside in their blood that gets passed down, and the relics, I kid you not, they say they are created out of the bones of the god's children.
Okay, that's pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
Weird. They all have these pretty grotesque designs, but yeah, you don't really get the sense that they're like effigies or whatever.
Yeah. And the hearts of the children apparently created the crests, like the crest stones in the relics.
Okay.
And all of this happened like in the aeons back, whenever what was that place called? Xanadu? Whenever there was that big massacre of all of the children, like ages ago, the humans who did that, like that's when they took the bones and made the weapons and took the blood and like somehow infused it with them. So like then their bloodlines get the crests and all that stuff.
Seizing the power of the gods, kind of.
Yes. Was that Nemesis that did that, or that he opposed them?
I get confused if that was Nemesis's group or if Nemesis just came up later and just kind of followed down that line somewhere.
Because my understanding was like Nemesis was sent by Sothis to stop someone, or something. Like he actually opposed. He actually was working for Sothis, but then at some point he kind of, and he had the Sword of the Creator and the Crest of Flames, but then he kind of at some point, rebelled, and I don't know if he like tried to seize power or what, but he's kind of remembered as a villain. I got the sense that he probably was,
Yeah, and I think he did like fight against Sothis's people at some point. Yeah, and I don't remember the details of if he started on her side and rebelled, like you said, or what I forget some of those details.
Well, actually, maybe it might be a good time if we just do a quick run through at a high level of some of like how our route played out and some of the events that happened. And just to clarify, you mentioned the first half plays out the same. Like things I remember are like, the mock battle of the eagle and lion. You have to find Flame. You have like the dance at the goddess tower. Like,
who was everyone's dancer?
Dorothea,
Annette.
100%.
Mine was Dorothea as well.
Annette.
Nice.
Okay.
I talked to another friend who played Blue Lions, and they made Sylvain their dancer.
Nice.
Hey, man.
Which I find hilarious.
That is really funny, and I could see it.
Yeah, I could see that.
Oh man, yeah, I was Dorothea. I think Dorothea is kind of set up to be the.
Yeah.
I have this great line from Dimitri. I don't know if this is all the house leads, but when you talk to Dimitri, he is like, "Don't pick me."
Oh, it's hilarious. But yeah, I think the first 10 or 11 chapters basically play out the same. It's a lot of like building up your students. There are a couple little mysteries of like things get stolen or people attack, like other people attacking, but it's a lot of just like kind of table setting, which I actually think the game does a pretty good job in those first 10 or 11 chapters of like creating mysteries.
Yeah, it does build out some of those mysteries about like, these different groups. I found it a little confusing at times because there were multiple groups, like secret groups doing things.
Right.
And I wasn't ever quite sure which groups were doing what or how many groups there were.
Right.
Because there's like the Flame Emperor doing stuff, and then there's this other like even more secret cult thing that's doing stuff. Yeah. And so I thought, but like they do a good job of like you're never really sure who's on what side and where these groups are coming from and what their goals are.
Yeah, maybe this is giving them too much credit, but I feel like some of that's intentional of like you're supposed to in some ways be sheltered students learning, like you're learning the ropes right now, and it's left to the adults to worry about who these bad groups are.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And so I think to some extent it's intentional that, Rhea and Seteth and those people never really explain who those groups are.
Right.
I do wish they had explained like this cult of darkness stuff a little bit more, because
I agree with that later on for sure.
I didn't get like, and I think like you said, in some ways it was a good thing early on, because that's sort of part of Dimitri's story, is that at one point he sees Edelgard associating with these people. And every time you talk to her after that, Dimitri's like, these people were involved with like the murder of my parents. Like, I am going to kill you. And she's like, that wasn't me. But, the fact that she is like willingly associating with these like really sketchy, like dark mages, like, definitely a huge strike against her. Like, she's, I don't know that. So I think, like you said, it was partly intentional, but then I felt like towards the end they just didn't quite. It's Fire Emblem villains; they're just kind of evil because that's what
they were one of my. There's a couple big plot points in this game that I don't think they handles as well as they could have, and that's one of them, because I actually fought that group in the Golden Deer route. Like, once Edelgard was taken down, I like went. It was so bizarre. We fought Edelgard and Hubert. They were the last, Black Eagles people we fought, of course. And once we win that map, Sedith or someone walks up to me and Claude and was like, "Hey, we found this letter on Hubert." And it was basically this letter that Hubert wrote, and he was like, "Hey, we figured out who the real bad people are. Anyone reading this letter, you must be reading this letter because I'm dead or whatever. We think we figured out where they are. They're here. They're the real bad people. Go kill them." And they don't necessarily explain how or why they're bad. They're basically just like, "Hey, go kill the bad people." So you go into this underground, I should find a picture of this, but it's the weirdest tonal shift because most of this game is medieval fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And you go into this underground facility that's this magic robotic type of looking place, and it plays techno music, and you're fighting these giant golems, and it's just weird. And you fight all of the bad, you fight that group, and the boss. Yeah, and the boss of that map is the white bearded guy who was in a cutscene. The cutscene when Byleth goes Super Saiyan, just before the time jump, it's that guy who was doing that stuff.
Solon, or
that
he was disguised as Tomas, or I thought you killed him though.
Yeah, it must not be him.
Yeah, I'll figure it out and post in the chat. But yeah, you do fight those guys, and I wish, to the point we were talking about earlier, I wish they kind of had explained they really only allude to, and they keep calling them just quote unquote those who slither in the dark.
Yeah.
And they kind of allude to the fact that this is an organization that has been around for generations, and they're bitter about the fact that Rhea and that group kind of won that ancient war and sealed away Nemesis, and this group went hiding underground and has been slowly operating behind the scenes, kind of orchestrating affairs all along. They even kind of allude to the fact that they kind of orchestrated Edelgard's her turn,
outlook or whatever.
Yeah, kind of orchestrated her fighting the church because they just wanted all of this fighting to go on.
Right.
But they don't really go into more detail than that. They just kind of hand wave it and being "Oh, these bad people were doing bad stuff." Which I feel like that could have had more fleshing out.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the groundwork they laid, I think, was okay. I mean, like you said, they were this weird supernatural group, and a lot of times, they sort of have the Fire Emblem villain trope of kind of being evil dark mages, just because that's what they are. But at the same time, they kill Geralt, and they kind of step in and they obviously hate you because I guess you have they kind of see that you have Sothis' power or whatever, the sword of the creator. So it is something, I think, like you said, they maybe could have handled that whole shadow organization a little bit better, a little less anime and a little bit more down to earth and well explained. But it sounds like you were talking about some of maybe the end of the Golden Deer route, but do you want to is there anything kind of earlier on, or how the whole arc plays out, that you think would be kind of interesting to talk about?
Yeah, so the whole deal, I guess I'll just, because there's really, the Golden Deer is more interesting in its overall arc than it is in any of the details, outside of the characters, which I like.
I am really curious specifically how the Edelgard's revolution leading to the time jump was portrayed in your route.
Yeah, and I'm curious, maybe this is a good point for all of us, because I'm really curious how that was portrayed from your point of view.
Right.
I'm imagining that Ryan's and mine were kind of similar. So you're for some reason you're down in the some tomb thing
of Saros or Sothis or
something like that.
For some reason you're down there,
the
and
quote unquote holy tomb, or
And basically,
Rhea wanted you to go down there with her after you go Super Saiyan.
And sit on the throne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point down there, the Flame Emperor shows up.
Right.
And I forget if it's before or after you fight her, but at some point it's like Edelgard takes the mask off and it's like, yep, surprise, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
That was a surprise to me, by the way.
Yeah, it was to me too. And yeah, at that point, like you don't have a choice like you do in the Black Eagles route. You just side against you side with Rhea against Edelgard.
Right.
Because it's like they kind of portray it as Edelgard is the aggressor in this situation. Like she's the one that's stirring the pot and causing the conflict. So Claude is like there's no real debate about it. Claude's just like, hey, if you're going to attack, we're going to fight.
That makes sense.
There's not much to do about that. So it actually plays.
Does Rhea become a dragon?
Yes.
Okay.
So you fight off, you have that fight in the tomb, and then there's one battle after that before the time jump, and it's Edelgard's forces assaulting the monastery. Mm-hmm. So you have this battle like in the monastery courtyard or whatever, like just outside the monastery. And you win that fight, and I can't remember if you fight Edelgard again in that fight. Either way, it doesn't really matter. But
yes, I think.
You win that fight, and then there's a cutscene that I'm guessing Golden Deer and Blue Lions, and maybe even the church route, if you go that route, all have the same cutscene of like soldiers fighting in the field, and Rhea tells you to run away because you're too important. And Rhea turns into a dragon at that point in the cutscene, mm-hmm. and jumps down into the field and starts fighting all the troops. And for whatever reason in the cutscene, Byleth runs down and tries to help.
Yeah.
She has like 3 or 4 of those crest beasts like kind of pinning her.
Yeah.
And so he like uses the sword of the creator to like cut one of them off.
Yeah. And then during that fight, Byleth gets knocked down a near bottomless pit.
Right.
And then it cuts to time jump, and that Byleth is kind of, lost down the pit.
That's pretty much what I saw. Like there was some story setting before and obviously after that. There was maybe a little bit of warm up that affects the Blue Lion story, but yeah, that segment is pretty much exactly as you described for me.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is, I have a lot of things I'm curious about. But so after the time jump, there was this one of my favorite missions in the game, like thematically, was like I find Claude in the monastery. He's basically hanging out because there was this promise of like 5 years later we'll meet here again. Mm-hmm. Which I think all the routes kind of play off of that promise.
Yes.
But then there's like this mission where you start with just Byleth and Claude, and like every turn or two, like another house member or two like pops on the map and like, hey, we're here too. And you're
that's cool. Yeah,
you're
that's
fighting these Yeah. So did you not get that, Nate?
No, I don't remember a specific mission like that. No.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was a really cool. It was kind of a hard mission actually, but it was because you only start with 2 people. But mm-hmm. I thought thematically it was really cool. I'm guessing you got something similar, Ryan.
Yeah. Although it's funny because the story trappings were a little different. Dimitri wasn't there because he was remembering his promise.
Yes. Yeah. So Claude, there was like a cut scene when you come out of the time jump and you show back up at the monastery, and it's this cut scene of like Claude standing in like this ruined part of the monastery, and there's like this sun beaming on him and like some flowers struggling to grow amongst the rubble, and Claude's just like all smiley and cheering. He's like, hey, Teach, glad you remembered our promise. Let's go have fun again.
After like, you've been like...
It's like, what, sure, Claude.
Presumed dead. I think
you'd come.
I think that the story, I mean, it's very, very similar in its structure. I think the story makes a little more sense for the Blue Lion's house, because you see the same scene, but then Dimitri's like, have you come to haunt me too? Like,
yeah.
Because one of Dimitri's things is like...
I actually watched that scene.
yeah, his whole family died, and that like weighs heavy on his mind. And pretty much like it's kind of neat because around the time of the time jump, he gets stabbed in the back pretty hard by Edelgard and like thrown in prison and sentenced to death. So it's kind of understandable that he loses it a little bit more. But yeah, like by the time you meet him, he's kind of like going off the deep end.
Yeah. So when does he? After I finished, I watched cutscenes from some of the other routes, and there's this cutscene in the Blue Lions route where like Dimitri just has this like madman style laugh and like rushes at Edelgard. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
When did that happen?
Yeah, so that's actually probably one of the more interesting things in the Blue Lion route is like right before the time jump, you go for whatever reason. I don't know if he asked you to meet him or like you just happen to be out and you spot him, but like you're like right outside the monastery, maybe in the town, and like he's like, I've been suspecting something, like, I'm glad you're here, like, let's come watch this. And so he sees the Flame Emperor meeting with this like shadow organization. Like she's meeting with like, I don't remember if it was specific characters or like people in the darkness. And I think, or, like just general dark mages. And I think maybe they reference the tragedy of Dusker. I don't know if you're familiar with that reference at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that's where Dedu came from.
Yeah. So, I guess, it probably is good to mention this because this is actually, again, this is one of the things that I think differs between the different houses and seeing their different perspectives. But one of the things you hear a lot about in the Blue Lion house is what's called the tragedy of Dusker, which apparently took place about 5 years before even before the time skip. It was like 5 years before that. So Dimitri was like 13 or 14, but probably at least half, if not more, of the people in the Blue Lion house had been touched by that event. Which what happened was, Dimitri's father, who was the king, he brought his family. They were trying to make like a peace accord with this like neighboring nation, which is Dusker. Well, on the way, I don't know if it was on the way there or on the way back, and I don't know if that matters, but basically like their entourage is attacked and like everyone dies except for Dimitri. And then there's like, it gets blamed on the people of Dusker. So there's this like retaliation where they kind of like basically like burn Dusker to the ground. And Dimitri saves Dedu because he doesn't necessarily believe it's them. But yeah, like Felix's brother, Glenn, who was one of the royal knights, he dies there. Ingrid was betrothed to Glenn. So, it's kind of touched her. Obviously, it's touched Dimitri. It's touched Dedu. Like, so right. A lot of these characters like have. So it's a huge event, and Dimitri, he's kind of this Boy Scout, but sort of in the middle to the later part when you start seeing some of these suspicious events. Like he starts to let the mask go a little bit. And he, at one point, he tells you, he's like, the whole reason I'm here is for revenge. And then, so what you're asking about, Flex, is when you get to the part where you're in the Holy Tomb and Edelgard reveals that she's the Flame Emperor, well, right before that, you see the Flame Emperor kind of rubbing elbows with these guys who are like taking credit for the tragedy of Dusker.
Right.
And he's like, I know who to go for.
Yeah.
And so he like, you had already started to see him like you would get like before a battle and he would just start like spouting like violence. And and you'd be like, whoa, like, you know, like,
Chill, dude.
this is like not the Boy Scout nice guy, like most considerate guy Dimitri that you normally see. This is like, this is like psychopath. But he like, so you're in the Holy Tomb and he sees that, and he like picks up two guys, like two of her guards or whatever, like with his bare hands. I mean, Dimitri is a beast, and like they make it clear in the game, and he like takes one guy and just like snaps his neck with like one hand, and he starts like laughing maniacally, and he's like he's like, I'm gonna ask you one question, and she says something, and he's like, I don't remember giving you permission to speak. He's just like
he seems like he totally loses it for a bit there.
Well, and then that's kind of funny because, like, you know, she teleports away. I think from there, like, she has mages with her who teleport her out, and you know, Dimitri's like slightly irritated, but he's like, I'll get her eventually. He's like, and then you know, the whole time skip thing that you described happens, but then like apparently, after the monastery was captured, he went back to Ferdiad, the capital of the kingdom, and like was betrayed, like because in her conquest she turned like some of the nobles and people. So one of the royal advisors, Cornelia, betrays him, like throws him in prison and sentences him to die. And Dudu helps break him out, and you know, doesn't make it out, so you presume he's dead. Right. So when you meet Dimitri in the monastery, he's just kind of been like wandering the land, like killing anybody like related to the Empire, like pretty brutally. The way they describe it is, like, I mean, he just is like truly like for a while, like, I mean, you can't build support with him, like. He just like, he is just like not like a very good person to be around.
Yeah, I'm really glad they like, because when I was first trying to pick houses, I was looking at him like, man, Blue Lion seems boring. Dimitri just seems like your generic goody two shoes Boy Scout. Like nothing about those characters seem interesting. They just seem very boilerplate. And I'm so glad that like, and I think that's. You mentioned earlier that the strength of Fire Emblem is its characters, and I'm glad that like my first thought about Dimitri was totally wrong. Like he has a lot of character building to him and a lot of history, and like they flesh him out in really fascinating ways, and that's cool to see.
Yeah, so I think you know, there's definitely a part there where you're like, man, this guy is getting like beyond redeemable, like. Like there's one point where he's like basically torturing this like enemy general after you've won a battle, and Byleth, like you as the player, you just walk up and kill the guy because you're like, I'm just gonna put him out of his misery, like he doesn't deserve this.
Yeah. But he does, from what I've heard, Dimitri does turn around eventually, right?
Yeah.
Kind of has his redemption arc, so to speak.
Yeah, a little bit of that. I think they eventually play that out, which is interesting. It's a combination of things too.
So is there some like relationship between Dimitri and Edelgard, like some pseudo familial relationship?
Yes.
Okay. I'm guessing. I of course didn't get any of that in my route, but it sounds like both of you got some of that in your roots.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics at this point, but there was definitely like some insinuation that they kind of grew up together in some way.
Right.
I think so. Dimitri's stepmother was Edelgard's birth mother.
Okay.
That might be right. I don't remember.
Like steps.
I just remember like she went to live in the kingdom for some amount of her childhood and was friends with Dimitri.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it was super long. I think it was like maybe only like a summer or like a year tops.
Right.
They were like, I don't know,
So
like 12 or something.
In both of your routes, does that factor into their relationship in the like final chapters at all, or is that just mostly just kind of mentioned and doesn't really play a role?
I feel like for me that was kind of mentioned, and maybe if I had like worked harder on getting support levels with Dimitri, I would have gotten more of that. But
I don't think you can support with the other houses leaders, can you?
Well, you can't recruit them, but
I
guess you could, try to rank up with them.
I know you can get support with like regular people even if you don't recruit them. I don't know if you can with the leaders or not, though.
I'm not sure. But what it really felt like to me in the end stages was like by the time I was clashing with Dimitri as Edelgard on the battlefield, it was just like the most bitter. Like, right. They just were ready to kill each other.
Right.
Wow.
So I watched the final cutscene of the Blue Lions, and that kind of gave me the impression that Dimitri had kind of softened on Edelgard a little bit. Like, if I remember that scene correctly, he kind of offered her a chance to surrender without dying. And she like basically rejected it somehow, like tried to attack him or something, and he had to kill her. Is that accurate, Ryan? Or
yeah. So the way it plays out in the Blue Lion is after kind of Dimitri has his redemption arc. He's like, we've got to stop Edelgard, but he's like, I'm gonna try to talk to her. And to a certain extent, like it's almost like they don't even remember, or they barely even remember that time. Like sometimes they reference it directly, and sometimes they sometimes they're like, oh yeah, it was you who gave me that dagger all those years ago. It's like, I remember that. But yeah, so after his redemption arc, he softens, and as you're approaching the final battle, he's like, yeah, I'm going to ask her, like, why she's fighting this war. And so they have a conversation, like, he offers her, like, to meet before the final battle, and they have a conversation where they talk a little bit about that, but then they also, like, I felt like that conversation didn't exactly make sense, because in some cases Dimitri sounded like he was like, yeah, don't you believe in the people to like rise up? Like, he was saying things like that, which was kind of weird to me coming from him. But,
right.
But they basically come to the consensus that like they're glad they had the conversation, but they kind of, agree to disagree, and like,
right,
the battle's going to happen regardless.
And is Edelgard is the final boss in Blue Lions?
Yes. She's called Hegemon Edelgard.
Yeah, it's really bizarre.
Yeah, she turns into this like monster.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, every time I think of Edelgard, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they want all the final bosses to be like really just really memorable and like have a stark look to them and stuff. Because like,
and it's very clear that you should be fighting them. They're clearly the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I fought Edelgard in my route, but she was not the final boss, so she just looked like a normal-ish unit. She did not look like Ryan just posted a picture of the final Edelgard boss in his route. She does not look like that for me. Dimitri has some of the best quotes of just like the most like rage metal, like I'm gonna murder everything.
Yeah, whenever I had him fight her, because sometimes if you have like
they'll have quotes.
If you have units fight each other, they'll have quotes. Like, it's funny, because Edelgard is like, she fought me or Byleth, and she's like, your journey ends here, Professor, forever. And I was like, thanks, Edelgard. Like, it's good to see you too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dimitri's is like, stab your chest, break your neck, smash your head. Like,
yeah. Yeah, he's all right. So I want to turn in just a minute to ask Nate some questions about his route, and I have some other things to say on my route. But quick anecdote is how I wanted to describe Dimitri's fate in my route.
Yeah, I am curious about because if he doesn't have that redemption arc, and I assume with the time
I'm pretty
jump,
sure you're the only one who gets the redemption arc.
Yep.
Yeah, with the time jump, I mean, Dimitri becomes even in my route, him, the professor and even his close allies are this is not working.
Does Dedue follow him? So, I know Dedue disappears for a while and then comes back. Does he only come back, kind of once Dimitri has made his redemption? Or is he ever around when Dimitri's crazy? Because Dedue seems like the one person who might follow Dimitri even when he's at his most crazed.
I think he comes back before the redemption arc. And even though it's not a direct line, I think it is one of the things, there's a series of things that happen that kind of snap Dimitri out of his stupor, and one of them was he thought Dedue was dead. So I think by the time Dedue makes it back, it's not very long before Dimitri kind of comes back down to earth. But yeah, I mean, Dedue is Mr. Hyper Loyal, and he's he's I would take my own life if Dimitri asked me to. So he's if he's like this, then whatever.
Yeah, he's so loyal. I wanted to recruit him so badly before I realized I couldn't. I spent months and months trying to recruit him.
Yeah, Dedue, Dedue cracks me up. I like him.
It is funny, yeah, because I didn't realize you couldn't recruit Hilda, but I never really wanted to recruit Hubert because he was always such a jerk. After Geralt dies, he just is I'm not good with condolences.
Yeah.
Which weird side note, because you can't recruit house leaders or their quote unquote retainers, which are their second hand people. And it's obvious that Hubert is that for Edelgard and Dedue is that for Dimitri, but nothing in my route ever hints that Hilda is Claude's retainer. That is not a thing in my route, and it confuses me that they treat it that way for the other routes. You can't recruit Hilda. That's just bizarre.
Yeah, I didn't really get much of that until one of the missions in the Blue Lion house, you're trying to rescue the golden deer from the black eagles, and Hilda is basically the second. She's Claude asked me to do this. This is too much responsibility.
Because they really portray the golden deer as a collection of ruling houses that are all equal. And Claude is from one house, Hilda's from one house, Lawrence is from a house. Everyone's just from a different house. And it's odd that it's even only barely that Claude is the leader because he's just another house. And anyone past him has no standing above the others in the way it's portrayed for me. So it's just interesting that for the other, if you pick another route, that Hilda's portrayed as the retainer. But so in my route, so most of Claude's route is he's trying to do all this unifying political wheeling and dealing. A lot of it's trying to earn allies and convince because after the time jump, basically the kingdom, the Blue Lion's territory is just completely taken over. And so and a lot of the Leicester Alliance, the Golden Deer territory is kind of fractured because they are all separate houses. They're not super unified. So the ones that are on the border with the Black Eagles are kind of playing nice to the Black Eagles a little bit. And, some of the ones farther away from the conflict are just kind of doing their own thing. So Claude spends a lot of time doing wheeling and dealing, trying to unify allies and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So once you actually start making the push into Black Eagles territory, once you've kind of gotten enough allies, you haven't heard anything of Dimitri or Blue Lions during any of this. And this is, 3, 4, 5, whatever chapters after the time jump. And you get to that chapter where you reenact the 3-way battle at Gronder Fields, which I think all the routes have that. And it's
Yes.
like the mission before that, there's like, Claude, we have reports of a group wielding the Blue Lions banner, moving the Kingdom banner, moving through Alliance territory. They're not attacking anyone. They're just moving through very quickly. What should we do? And Claude's just like, just let them go if they're not attacking. And then sure enough, you start the Gronder Field thing, and that group pops up, and it's Dimitri and everyone. And this is literally the only mission in the game where you see Dimitri and most of the Blue Lions people, because most of them die in that battle.
Okay.
And
I could imagine that.
Yeah, and they portray it as like, so like you go there to fight Edelgard, and they basically portray it as like you're setting up to fight Edelgard, and Dimitri just pops up on the side, and he's like, there's Edelgard, and there's also a bunch of other people. I don't care who they are, just kill them all.
It is funny, like, so I kind of wondered what Dimitri would do in the other routes, and I figured, he would not play nice. It's kind of funny that I figured especially with the Black Eagles, he would just be kind of at your throat. But it's funny that he just pops up. I guess, the Blue Lions has less of the crazy story other than Edelgard turning into a monster at the end. So the Blue Lions route is much more cut and dry. But so they do a lot more setup for the Battle of Gronder Field, and it's like, well, we haven't heard much from the Alliance, but we're trying to negotiate with them. Maybe if they show up at the battle, they'll be willing to ally with us. And I think you might have even I think one of the battles along the route was securing the bridge, so you could start pushing towards. Too,
actually.
Yeah, and for that, because I guess that's in Alliance territory.
Yep.
I faced, I think, Lorenz and maybe one other. It may have been an Empire student. I don't remember exactly who the other one was.
Yeah. So actually, the house Lorenz. What's his house's name? Leicester, maybe? I don't know. Whatever. Oh, Gloucester. That's his house.
Okay.
House Gloucester that Lawrence is from was a border state to the Empire.
Right.
And they were in my route even, it was portrayed that Lawrence's father was kind of playing nice with the Empire, and basically out of fear of if they did anything to anger the Empire would just crush them because they're just right there at their door.
Right.
So I could totally see in the Blue Lions route it being a thing of House Gloucester just joined the Empire.
It was half the Alliance was with, basically supporting the Empire, and it's we need to secure the route to this bridge because, the whole Blue Lions campaign, you eventually pivot back to retake Ferdiad from one of the, I mentioned that the Empire had kind of turned some of the lords for the kingdom. So you end up marching back to the capital to retake it. But then, a lot of the Alliance missions are okay, we need to take the bridge. It's an Alliance territory. We'll have to fight House Gloucester, maybe House Ordelia, but I had recruited Lysithea, so I didn't see her. And then, it was the Battle of Gronder, which that was funny. I think I made the comment on Discord, Claude is such a jerk.
Yeah.
Because, he does the same kind of thing where it's you have this triangle formation with Edelgard way down in the bottom corner. And so I get halfway into the map, and he just pops out on the side, and he's Edelgard had kind of made these overtures where she's we don't really want to fight them together, so I'm going to make things chaotic. But he just pops out right beside me, on my flank, and he's well, I can't tell who's who. We're gonna have to fight our way through, and I'm seriously?
Yeah.
So I had to turn away from the Empire, and here I am in the middle of the map with all my squishy guys kind of exposed, and I'm all right, someone's tough, run in and use a gambit and lock down all these Alliance people because they're being jerks. Got these guys Claude with his fail not bow. He's this ridiculous
Claude's insane.
Oh.
It's that's actually one of the like I feel like in my route they're able to hand wave it a little more by just saying, "Oh, Dimitri's crazy and wants to fight everyone." Like that's kind of how they play it in my route, but that doesn't work quite so well with Claude. So it sounds like they tried, and I talked to someone else who did Blue Lions, and they said the same thing you said, and it sounds like they tried to portray it as, "Oh, the battlefield's too crazy, so Claude's just attacking you." They can't tell who's who, and that to me sounds way flimsier of a way to write that.
It just doesn't sound like Claude. He's so tactical and precise.
Yeah, like Claude, like having played a whole campaign with Claude, like that is a situation he would not engage in unless he knew exactly what he was doing.
Right.
That was my like Claude's a jerk moment.
Yeah. So like I feel like the writing around some of those kind of moments just did not. I feel like they wanted to recreate that three-way battle so badly that they didn't quite find good enough ways to narratively justify it in all the routes, which is kind of a bummer. Because, I mean, gameplay-wise, it's kind of a fun battle, but...
Yeah, and I mean, they're not afraid to in a lot of other ways. Like, you know, we talked about, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but yeah, for like a big chunk of Park 2, like I couldn't build support with Dimitri. Like, I couldn't advance support or build support, and I assume that didn't happen with you guys, maybe?
Nope. Claude was all super friendly and the whole time.
Yeah. When he was in insane mode, he was not like very nice.
Yeah, I'm just saying super friendly in my route the whole time.
Yeah. I'm talking about Dimitri.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that battle with Gronderfield, they portray Dimitri as crazy and wants to fight anyone and everyone.
That's funny that he just pops up, dies, and then that's his whole cameo.
Yep, that was he literally was just a cameo in my campaign. Like, I'm crazy, want to kill everything, and then you beat him in that battle and he's dead. But so the twist though is like of course you fight him on the battlefield, just like you fought Claude, and I'm sure Nate, you had that battle too, I assume.
I'm while you guys were talking, I was trying to remember if there was a battle like that in my playthrough, and there wasn't one quite the same, I don't think, because the battle with the fights where Claude and Dimitri end up getting killed are separate battles from that. Okay. I do remember Gronderfield being a thing, but I don't remember a battle similar to what you guys are talking about.
Right.
So I do.
So okay. Finish the story real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again. So you fight Dimitri, and they portray it as like when you kill his unit, they portray it as he backs off. Both him and Dedu. The rest of the Blue Lions, as far as I know, you just kill them right there. Poor Mercedes.
Yeah.
And
it was Ignatz and Raphael.
Yeah. So then of course you fight the Black Eagles as well, kill Bernadetta and whoever, and make Edelgard retreat. And then so after the battle you get this scene where someone walks up to you, I forget who, but one of the Golden Deer people walks up and they're like, and someone's like, "Did anyone see what happened to Dimitri?" And someone's like, "Yeah, he was bleeding and wounded, but he was mumbling something about how he has to kill Edelgard." and they were like, and we saw him stumbling like after Edelgard as she was retreating, just limping along the ground, and like a dozen Empire soldiers run up and spear him to death.
Oh my gosh.
Oh wow.
And then apparently, so then Dedu pops up. And they basically, Dedu basically, walks up, finds Dimitri's dead body. And then Dedu basically snaps, and he's like, "Dimitri, I will carry forth your quest to see Edelgard's head on a spike," or whatever.
What?
Yeah. So then Dedu wanders away again. And then 2 or 3 chapters later, or whenever it is that I'm actually in the Black Eagle's castle, the final time I fight Edelgard, Dedu just like 5 turns into the battle, I'm like, fighting all these units, and then like out of this gate in the back, like near the throne room where Edelgard's sitting, the dude just like pops through this gate.
That's so good.
I know. And he pops in as a green allied unit.
Nice.
And he just like barrels straight towards Edelgard, and like I'm like throwing these long range heals from the physics skill at him. I'm like, hang in there, to do. You got this, buddy. And he like he's like a big tanky fortress knight or whatever. So he's just mowing down all these physical fighters, and then he gets into the throne room where Edelgard is, and all of these mages just run up and like 2-shot him.
Yeah. That's about. He was.
You feel like it's possible to save him?
Oh, I was basically 1 turn away from saving him. So I actually thought about restarting the battle, because if I had known he was popping in, I feel like I could have saved him. But it was one of those things where, like, you start the battle, I start moving a different direction, and then he pops in, and I'm like, I am in no great position to help him.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if he joins you if you save him.
I have no idea. I'm really curious to know that, because it has to be possible to save him, because like if I just moved a handful of units like in that direction, like all I would have to do is kill the mages before they gang up on him.
Yeah. And
once I saw him pop in, I started redirecting some units that way, and I did kill some of the mages before he got there, but not enough of them.
Right.
So like it's definitely got to be possible to save him. But that just cracked me up when Dedu popped in. He's like, "Hey, dudes, what's up?"
That is hilarious how the Blue Lions sort of play like a bit part, which I mean, it sounds like your route kind of went off into like Nemesis land anyway. But
yeah, so after I have so many questions for Nate that we haven't gotten into. Should I go ahead and tell how Golden Deer wrapped up, or
that's fine?
You want to shift tracks?
Sounds good.
So yeah, most of the Golden Deer route, like I said, was kind of like Claude forming plans for like, all right, how can we unify these people? How can we get allies to go take down Edelgard? And his whole thing is like he wants to just have a unified world, not just Fodlan. He describes Fodlan as a I forget the phrase he uses, but he basically describes Fodlan as this like isolationist continent.
Yeah.
And like all of the borders have been really locked down, and like no one comes in or out. And he basically uses terminology of like he wants to break down those barriers and like make a more unified world in general.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to stop all the fighting and like get everyone on the same page. And he's basically like, first order of business means we have to stop Edelgard because she's causing all this fighting.
Yeah.
So of course, got to go fight to stop fighting. The classic conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said this is Claude's goal, or this is like
Claude's goal? Yes.
Okay, because that's interesting. Just as a bit of an aside, so in the Blue Lion route, after he backs off at Gronder Field, you actually go to the capital. I mentioned to save, like he asked you to come help save us from the Empire. But then when you win that battle, he kind of walks up to you and he's like, "Yeah, here's my bow. Like, you can have control of my forces." The Alliance becomes part of the kingdom, and he's like, "I'm going off, like I'm sailing away, leaving Fodlan to take care of some business." So I wonder if that's like a nod to that story.
Possibly, yeah.
Anyway, tangent aside, please continue.
Yeah, so you spend a lot of chapters like getting supplies, calling in, like it's funny because like when you're doing the part like at the monastery, like during the weeks, they portray it as like Claude's off out and about, like doing his political wheeling and dealing.
Yeah.
And he's like supposedly like going and talking to other Alliance people, trying to get allies, doing other stuff. There's actually one chapter where the Almirans, who are from the east, not in Fodlan, they actually like you're invading one of the forts of the Black Eagles, and there's actually this cutscene where like all of these horse people ride up and join your fight, and they're Almirans from the east. So he had had basically conscripted them as allies, and you have a bunch of green allied units on the map who are Almirans. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then when you finally take down Edelgard, and it's like, all right, the Empire's taken care of, all that stuff. Then what I mentioned earlier, you find that letter on Hubert that's like, hey, we found the real bad people. So then you immediately turn, and it's only one chapter, but you go down into that, it's called like Shambhala or something like that.
That's the soundtrack you sent.
Yes. Yeah, that's the music that plays during that level, which is like this really intense dubstep that does not sound like it belongs in a Fire Emblem game at all, which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, you go down there and you fight Talus, something like that. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I posted a picture in the chat of him, and he's, running that group, and you fight those guys. And, the thing is basically like, oh, these are the people that have been behind the scenes, like orchestrating so much conflict over centuries. So it's kind of portrayed as like, this is the real evil we need to root out to like make more long lasting peace in the world, if that makes sense. So you go down there, you beat them and all their weird techno mysticism stuff. And then you get out, you go back to and there's actually a cutscene at the end of that fight where Rhea turns into a dragon again.
Mm-hmm.
Because did you get a cutscene in your campaign, Ryan, where like all of these like missiles fell from the sky on one of the Black Eagles forts after you conquered it?
What?
I don't think so. No.
So that same battle where the Almirans showed up, when I won that battle, there was like all of these like big, just like red energy blasts from the sky just like fell on the fort and like crippled it, like even though we had taken it over. And like everyone had to flee, and like, a bunch of soldiers died, and people were like, what was that? Like, I don't know. Is this some weird Empire trick? Like, what's going on? And then you learn later, and I think Hubert's letter even said this, it was like those missiles that came from the sky were from this group. So as you finish beating up on this group, they summon, as a like last desperation thing, they summon these missiles again. And that's when like Rhea turns into a dragon, and I forget exactly what she does. I'll try and find this cutscene in a minute and send it to you guys. But she ends up getting hit by some of those missiles. I think she's trying to like buy time for you to escape somehow. But yeah, and she gets really badly hurt again. So she's like in the final chapter, like when you're have the big dialogue dump beforehand, she's like, she looks really sickly and like injured.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you beat up all those guys, and like you get back out of that, and it's like, all right, everything, things should be cool now, right? Like we stopped the Empire, like they're not trying to fight anymore. We killed this other dark group. Things are cool, right? But then the other thing you see when you beat that dark group, is you see a cutscene of like these chains around a coffin looking thing, like pop off, and it's a really goofy comical scene. And like these chains pop off and the door opens, and then it's like Nemesis is in there, and he just like gives an evil smile, and it fades to black. So they definitely pull the old evil has been revived somehow.
Yeah.
And they kind of, I think they like Rhea has some line of like that group like killing them somehow broke the seal, but like that seems odd to me, because why wouldn't?
Before or after you go to the moon and fight Zeramus?
Well, all right, we're getting to the moon. Hang on. Yeah, it gets a little contrived and silly at the end. Absolutely.
That's unfortunate, yeah, because I do like, I mean, the Hegemon Edelgard thing was kind of weird, although, you see like the Crest Beasts, and she's like doing all these experiments to like kind of forge these artificial crest stones or weapons or whatever, like, so it's not that off the chart, and it's pretty much just her and done. So I guess I do like that the Blue Lions didn't quite go so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so bizarre that pathway, the Golden Deer pathway, goes to those extra steps.
Right. Like, why are they the route that gets Nemesis?
Especially with how my route ended, like, it just makes no sense that yours is the only route that does that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think what they're going for, and they did not nail the execution. Like, I actually feel like the Golden Deer route is the route that had the least investment in the Edelgard conflict.
Right.
So I honestly feel like they should have ended Edelgard's part like 3 or 4 chapters sooner. Like, I feel like that should have been a quicker war.
Right.
And they should have taken more time to flesh out the Nemesis stuff. Because I think what they're going for is actually kind of interesting. I just think the execution is really... Because, like, the Golden Deer route has 22 chapters. You finish off Edelgard in chapter 20.
Right.
And chapter 21 is fighting those that slither in the dark. And then chapter 22 is fighting Nemesis. And then it's over.
Right.
So,
whereas my route only had 18 chapters total.
Right. So, like, I think what they were going for is, like... Because, again, Claude's whole thing, and he gets on a monologue about this 2 or 3 times, is he wants to stop all of the fighting and, you know, create a more unified world and all this stuff. And he actually talks about what we were talking about earlier of, like, a lot of fighting comes from people having different perspectives. And he feels like people have different perspectives because we have these such intense borders set up where people can't come and go. And he's like, I want to knock down all the walls and I want to have everyone mingling with each other because then they'll understand each other's perspectives and work together. And, you know, he has a very rosy picture of what the world can be. And he has a clear goal in mind that he wants to work towards. And he at least feels like he knows how to accomplish that.
Do they ever, like, challenge that or, like, show him under... I mean, obviously he has to unify the nobles, and that's kind of the sense I got of Claude, is that he's pretty skillful, but that he's kind of, like, in this loose coalition, so he's constantly having to, like, maneuver to do anything with them. Did they ever, like, challenge that rosy picture you're describing?
No, not really. I mean, I think a lot of it gets caught up in, like, the other characters in particular get, like, a lot of the times when he's talking about this stuff, he's mostly talking to just Byleth. And, you know, Byleth is kind of a mute.
Right.
Yeah.
Silent protagonist.
Yeah. So, like, most of the other characters are more concerned with just the moment to moment of, like, all right, well, if we got to stop Edelgard, we need to secure this bridge, and then we need to take this fort. You know, it's kind of that stuff. So I think what they're going for is they're trying to portray this, you know, group that slithers in the dark and Nemesis as kind of like the root evil that over centuries has incited a lot of the violence and such. So I think what they're trying to do with this root is like portraying Claude as getting more to that root, if that makes sense. I just don't think they take the time to flesh it out properly, and, you know, they use some more generic, like, comic booky / anime tropes of, like, people coming back from the dead and all this stuff. So, like, it definitely could have been handled a lot better. That said, I think the final map is actually really cool. Because I don't know if you got much reference to the 10 elites, quote unquote.
Yeah. Oh, are those the heroes who the Crester descended from? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So the final battle, actually, so Nemesis is the final boss, but the 10 elites are also around the map, and basically Nemesis has stat buffs from them that make him basically invincible if you try and bum rush him. So you have to go around this huge map and kill all the 10 elites along the way. So that's kind of neat. It could have been, again, fleshed out over more chapters, but it's kind of a neat mechanical thing at the end because, you know, you're fighting these 10 elites. And then the cutscene at the end where Claude and Byleth take down Nemesis is hilarious. Because it's like, Nemesis is this big beefcake who's like, I am strong and will smash you. Like, he just has this generic dialogue. And Claude, like, does this, you know, plays a trick where he pretends to get knocked down, but actually, like, send an arrow up in the sky that's going to fall on Nemesis at the right timing and, you know, all this stuff. And it's kind of a well choreographed scene, at least. But yeah, that's how that route wraps up. And in kind of the after summary, they kind of portray it as like, yeah, they, like, Byleth took over the the church and unifying Fodlan, and Claude's dream is closer to being realized and all this stuff. And they do kind of, to what you were saying, Ryan, like kind of paint the rosy picture in the wrap up, for better or worse.
Right.
So, Nate.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Church of Saros and your thoughts about crests.
One last little nugget. I don't know if you got your support with Lysithea up very high, Ryan, or Nate, if you even recruited Lysithea. But
I have a funny note on that.
Nice. But Lysithea,
maybe.
Oh, nice. So Lysithea talks about how she only has a few years to live. And apparently that group that slithered in the dark did experiments on her and was trying to infuse her with more magical power and like all this stuff. It was like, and the experiments they did on themselves. And if you remember that Phallus guy, he had white hair, and Lysithea has white hair. Apparently that's a side effect of the experiments. And as is the shortened lifespan that Lysithea has. So she actually becomes more of a prominent character when you're dealing with that group, as kind of a side note. But anyway.
That is actually kind of cool because, I did get to a high support level with her. And like you said, it was odd at the time. It was like, I mean, you kind of see what these people have done to like Dimitri in terms of orchestrating events, but the whole like dark magic stuff you don't really see outside of like, I actually did like that cutscene too, where, the group has killed Geralt, so you kind of go after them, and they kind of like banish you to this other world.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sothis is like, well, there's only one way out of this. She's like, I'm going to give you some of my power, but we won't be able to speak anymore. And like, you cut your way out of like that void realm. I kind of like that. I thought that was pretty. Although the green hair is kind of like,
the hair is hilarious.
It is. I mean, they kind of crack on it too with some of the character comments, like some of the students being like, "What happened to you?"
Yeah, I thought that was hilarious when that happened. I was just like, "Really?"
So the flavor of some of the ending stuff in the Golden Deer Route that sounds like corny and anime-ish, it kind of had the same vibe as that cutscene. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that's the tone it had.
I hear you.
So Nate, how did we talked about how the Edelgard's turn affected us? Like, how did that all go down for you?
So, couple of quick things that I'll interject here. First, Lysithea, for me, when I was fighting Claude's forces, the Alliance forces, she was just like kind of hanging out near the front line of one of the maps. I think it was the first map of the fights against the Alliance stuff, and I just ran up with Byleth and just one-shotted her, like right at the start of a fight, and then she was like, "Oh, I'll join you if you want." And then she joined my group.
What?
Really?
That's weird.
Yeah, it was so weird.
Oh, wow.
So you fought her and she joined you?
Yeah, and that's the only character that happened for her.
That's real. That didn't happen for anyone for me. That's
I have
wild.
no idea why that happened, but she was just like, yeah, I guess I'll join you. That's fine.
Weird.
That is so strange. I mean, she wants like a peaceful life for her parents. That's one of her side themes. But I don't know. That is very odd.
It was so weird. Anyway.
So
how did Edelgard's turn go for you?
The actual turn was I don't know. I knew there was a choice coming.
You went with the church route or the work with Edelgard route?
I stuck with Edelgard. So I knew there was a choice coming, and I knew it was whether you stuck with Edelgard or not.
Okay.
And so I was like, I don't know, I'll probably just stick with her because she seems cool. And then she just shows up and, does her thing. And I'm like, I'd kind of like some explanation here. But you don't really get any.
Wow.
And then she's just like, "Hey, you wanna do this? Let's do this." And I'm like, "Yeah, all right, let's do this."
Yeah. So did you actually fight against her in that map?
You do.
Like when she's the Flame Emperor?
Yeah, it was weird. It was like she shows up, she shows she's the Flame Emperor, and then you're forced to fight her.
Huh.
And like
Yeah.
even though you know it's her,
I know
you don't get a choice.
So, and when you fight her, I know one of the things, like, and maybe this is because she can't join you, but like the first couple times you fight her as the Flame Emperor, both with the helmet on and the helmet off, she's basically like, if there's one person in the world who I wanted, to be on my side, it's, and another time she's like, if there was anything I could say or do,
right?
I don't know if she does the same when you fought her.
She does. She definitely wants Violet on her side for sure. But yeah, it was weird that you're basically forced to fight her for one battle, and then she's like, "Hey, come on, buddy," and then you can join her if you want. So that was just kind of, I don't know, it was just kind of weird. Like I kind of understood where she was coming from with her revolution, just from support conversations with her, because I don't know if you guys get any of her backstory.
I didn't hardly at all.
Routes. Basically, she was, I don't know if it was fully like kidnapped or just like her father, who's the emperor, looked the other way, but she was experimented on, like her and all of her siblings as a kid, by people trying to awaken a crest in them.
That sounds similar to Lysithia's thing.
Right. And so there was this process that her and all her siblings went through that sounded like, this horrible years-long experience as a child that scarred her for life, of them trying to bring out a crest in her. And all of her siblings died from the process, and she's the only one that survived and got a crest. So then her whole revolution is around the idea of like, we need to destroy the church, which is she sees as like the central power where the crests come from, because it's from the gods, right? So that's basically her crusade, is like, we need to destroy the crest, we need to destroy the idea of nobility, we need to destroy the church for bringing this into humanity.
Right.
So
and
anyway,
she explained all of that to you before you choose whether to go with her or the church?
You get that backstory through various conversations during the part 1. And like at some point her and Hubert kind of open up about like, yeah, this is a thing, and we have plans when Edelgard becomes emperor, like we're going to do something about this, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then when she shows up, you're not really sure like how that fits in.
Right.
She just shows up and starts smashing stuff.
Yeah. And that's like from our, like, I assume Ryan is probably somewhat similar for Blue Lions, but for me, like, they never really explained why, like, what Edelgard was trying to accomplish, like why she turned, like all of this stuff.
Right. Which again, like, she has a backstory, she has a perspective that you just didn't see, and that was driving her actions. Yeah,
and I got the sense, I mean, the guise of the Flame Emperor and like some of her actions, plus the fact that she kind of declared open, she like the pretense, because I think after around the time skip, it's like she forced her father off the throne so she could be declared emperor, and she basically marched on Garreg Mach under the pretext that the church had been controlling the people or some such, and she also had, I don't know if crests were a big part of that, but you get the sense that there's something about the church, like the power structure or its relationship to Crest or whatever that she doesn't like. But yeah, as far as the specifics of, and I mean, of course, like obviously you have some friendships and investments in the church, and being conquered by a giant empire doesn't really sit well with most people.
No, probably not.
She definitely came across as a tyrant.
Oh yeah, I mean, like that's the thing with her. Like she is 100% like a warmongering, tyrannical emperor. You know, I think there is some work done to like give her actions reason if you're on her side. Like you'll see that.
That's kind of the main thing I'm curious about your route is like you said, like even if you're on her side, like she definitely is, she's starting this war. She's causing a lot of death. Like she is not innocent in this. But do they make her a sympathetic character?
Yeah, I would say they,
in a way that works.
Yeah, I would say other than just on its face, the fact that she started the war, they don't really, like, the game does not wag its finger at her or the Black Eagle House for what they're doing. They are portrayed as like liberators.
Right. Yeah, as the church is bad and you're the one stepping up to take them down. Is that kind of how it's portrayed?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, this is like clearly the church is a corrupting power structure. Crests are a tool that were, given to humanity in a way that made people like hurt each other and feel like they could lord power over each other over all these eons. Right. And that all of this needs to be abolished so that we can have like an equal society.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, like given the history of like, how the relics and crests came about and like how the church kind of does run things, like that all makes sense. Like you can see how someone would reach that conclusion and take those actions.
100%, especially if as a child they were like abducted and experimented on for the purpose of getting a crest, so that and would be powerful.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that had happened to her, which kind of lends a little more weight to this whole group slithering in the dark, like orchestrating things.
Yeah,
which
that might have been them. I don't know, honestly.
Okay. You don't know for sure, but she does have white hair, right? Which kind of
does.
That kind of lends a little bit of support to the fact that it may have been that group.
Yeah, it might have been.
That is one thing that is a bit odd because, like you said, there were some times where it's like, okay, she's like a strong leader figure and like she has this cause she's committed to. But on the other hand, I do feel like even if the game wasn't always wagging its finger at her, like, she kind of attacks the monastery unprovoked. She kidnaps Rhea and she has all these associations with this like really, really super sketchy group.
Yeah, 100%.
There were definitely times where, like, when some of my classmates were like fighting alongside the Death Knight, I'm like, guys, like, did we forget like when they kidnapped Flame and like threatened everybody's lives? Like,
you really don't have to read anywhere beyond the surface to say like, yeah, her methods are maybe a little much. Well, a lot much. Like she causes a lot of death and destruction, and that's they don't ever say like, oh, that's just fine. But they don't really like.
Like they never paint her, even in your route. It sounds like they never really paint her as a good, quote unquote, a good person who went about things the quote unquote right way.
Right.
But it sounds like they give you reason to understand why she may have done what she did.
Yeah.
Which is, that's it. There's never going to be like, oh, they did the right thing in that kind of situation. And if they're trying, this game is trying to portray three factions with three different viewpoints and a war breaks out, like it's going to be hard to portray anyone as fully in the right all the time.
Yeah, and we all should rightfully say like, "Hey, war is probably never the right answer," right?
Right.
So
yeah, that is cool because like I'm assuming Blue Lines is similar. Maybe there's a little more nuance with Blue Lines given Dimitri and Edelgard's history, but for the Golden Deer's part, like they don't really paint any sympathy for Edelgard. It's just like, well,
yeah,
like they more play it as like, hey, she started this war. We don't really know why, and we frankly don't care. She started a war, and we need to end it. Like,
yeah,
they from the Golden Deer standpoint, they kind of take a more matter of fact approach to it, and it's just like, hey, they started this, we got to end it.
right. And I think that's Edelgard's biggest flaw in her plan. Whether this was intentional by the writers or not, I think it probably was.
Right,
is that she just works in the dark and then comes out and starts a war, and she never tries to get the people on her side.
Right.
She just says, "Oh, I'm the one who can do this.
Like,
I'm going to take up this mantle and do what I think needs to be done."
Right. I mean, to some extent, that's kind of what Claude does as well. Like, he does a lot of slinking behind the scenes to like, I mean, he's trying to end wars, but
right.
he's still not explaining himself to people. He's like trying to make these alliances and do these things. And like the game definitely plays off the idea from multiple perspectives of, oh, people have different ideas of what should be done and how it should be done, and they don't necessarily explain themselves to other people.
Exactly.
So it's do they ever have any kind of portrayal of like Edelgard being like, I'm not going to bother explaining it to people because they won't understand, or do they just kind of not address it?
I don't think there was really anything that addressed that.
Okay.
Which is why I was kind of thrown off when she shows up and the choice happens, because you kind of expect her to be like, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, people who believe in me should come join me, but she just kind of comes in and starts killing people.
Yeah. This is where like part of the game, like I feel like they're so close because like some of what I love about this game is what we've been talking about a lot is they really lean into the idea of everyone comes from a different place, has different backgrounds and perspectives and different ideas, and that is naturally going to cause conflict. Like human conflict is inevitable is kind of one of the themes of this game, I feel like.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you can attribute a lot of the story beats and the writing to, oh, you don't always know what someone else is thinking. You don't know what their perspective is, their background is, their, why they're doing what you're doing. It's hard to understand that. And in some ways, I can kind of give a little bit of a pass to some of these things that aren't explained by taking that route of like, oh, you are playing a person, you are getting the perspective of Byleth in this story, and you are just not going to even if you're following Edelgard, you may not fully ever understand why she's doing what she's doing because she is her own person with her own ideas.
Right.
And like there's like, that's a way to write a story. I'm not 100% convinced that they fully pulled off all of the beats in a way that worked quite as well as it could.
Yeah, I definitely don't think they pull off all the like quote unquote plot points as well as they could. But I think in terms of character motivation and like how factions play off of each other, like I think they pretty much, I don't know. I guess it's hard to say like they got it all perfect because it could obviously go a million different ways. But like,
and there's the other thing is this story is so like if you think about all four routes, like everything that happens, like there's a lot of story in this game.
Yeah,
and it would probably be hard for them to nail every aspect of it.
But I think it does come across as more honest to me that not only does everybody have different experiences and ideas, but also, not everybody is like a great communicator about their ideas.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And like that causes some serious problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they even play off that in like very subtle ways in like support conversations of like,
Right.
like for me, Marianne had like some traumatic, and if you go through her, get her support all the way up, you learn about this stuff. But like she like her bloodline is like the crest of the beasts or whatever, and like her ancestors like basically murdered a bunch of people out of greed, and like her bloodline is seen as evil and that kind of stuff. And like she has all this like historical trauma that leads to like this a very extreme like self-worth issue of like, I'm not a good person because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And like she is very quiet and very like basically her default assumption is that everyone's going to hate her.
Right.
So like she has this, she's very quiet, she's very nervous, she runs away a lot, and like so she's point being she's very poor at communicating, like you were saying. So like in a lot of support conversations, she kind of like freaks out when she thinks she's offended someone, or she'll like run away, and that causes other people to get confused of like, oh, does she not like me? Like, why did she run away? Like, you know. And it just like, there's just this constant miscommunication between even, you know, those level of characters.
Right.
So then when you have that level of communication blown up to like leaders and stuff,
yeah,
it's of course going to get gnarly. And I do really like that this game, like, yeah, there's some anime cartoonish stuff with like Nemesis coming back.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
For the majority of the game and the majority of the conversations and interactions, like I think it does feel a lot more grounded, and it feels like they're like trying to mirror like how people really behave in these situations and how these kind of conflicts arise. And
right, because
really
you can imagine how much more boring it would feel if you, as the player and the main characters making decisions, like had all the information, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they just had all the information and then said, okay, what's the moral good choice here? Then it would be like, okay, well, that's a lot less interesting than this kind of messy, like everybody's working with different stuff and everybody feels different ways and nobody's really able to like stop and just like tell you why they're doing the thing they're doing because everybody's already got their weapons out.
It's wild. And even within, and I think that's actually where having the multiple routes, like in Fates, like we talked about Fates earlier, like I think Fates didn't really do a whole lot to justify the two sides other than just to have two sides against each other from the start. But like, I think like choosing between the three houses in this game really leans into that fact that different houses know different stuff, and like you learn different story tidbits depending on what house, and they really play into like, oh, you have a perspective that the others don't have.
Right.
And like that's really well done and really plays, and like they made that choice of which house you choose play into the game's overall theme.
Yeah.
Rather than really just cool. Like which characters do you want?
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. I kind of envision the Black Eagles route that you took being and you said it's the shorter one. It's only 18 chapters. So like, I'm curious if it does anything else or if it is a fairly straightforward war story of just like, nope, we're going to take down the church. And that's kind of the story.
I think that ended up being my problem with it, is that it does just become a pretty straightforward, just conquest story.
Right. Yeah. I think I was talking to someone else about this with the other friend I've brought up once or twice who did Blue Lions. And I feel like the Black Eagles kind of got gypped a little bit there. I'd be curious what the church route is, but yeah, I feel like you kind of just got the war story.
Yeah.
I feel like
on a side note, one thing I thought was kind of funny is when I was playing the game, it'll show you statistics of like which characters were deployed or who was involved in the most activities and support conversations.
Always Black Eagles.
And it was like all Black Eagles characters, and then like Ingrid and like Felix and maybe Lysithea. Like they're just like two, like some of the top heroes from other houses.
Yeah, some stats did come out. I'd be curious to know what that is now, if that's changed over time. But yeah, there were some stats that came out shortly after the game launched that like players were overwhelmingly picking Black Eagles. Like that was by far the most popular house to pick,
which is funny.
I think Nintendo sent like a poll before the game launched of which leader people were most interested in, and it was like 40 or 50% Edelgard, and then like 25% Claude and like 22% Dimitri or something like that. It was pretty funny.
I'd be curious what the church route is like, but from what Nate was saying just now of like Edelgard's route kind of being the more straightforward. I mean, it sounds like you get some, you definitely get the more background about Edelgard, which is interesting and worthwhile. But like kind of once you have that knowledge, it sounds like maybe the more straightforward one.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a bummer for you because I feel like kind of my perspective of the three routes, again, I don't know what the church route is like, but of the three we played is I feel like the Blue Lions is probably the most interesting one in terms of like character development and character arcs, because like Dimitri goes through a legitimate character arc where he falls and has redemption, and like that is kind of a classical character arc, and it sounds like it was done pretty well, and that sounds pretty fascinating. And I think the Golden Deer route gets a lot more of the historical, like more worldly historical angle of Fodlan and the world, and I think they play into that a lot, which is a different take. Like Blue Lions is kind of the more personal character arc, and I think Golden Deer gets a little bit of the broader historical take that I think ends up being really interesting. Like you get all of that background info and stuff. So I think both of those routes end up being narratively fairly satisfying. So it's kind of a bummer that, and for different reasons, which is cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a bummer that it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the route you took was not in the end that narratively satisfying.
No, and it's bizarre after hearing how the Golden Deer route goes. So I'll end on that with just the quick overview of how the part 2 of the Black Eagle Edelgard route goes is like monastery. The Rhea turns into a dragon, and they're like, "Oh, she's the evil dragon." And they don't really ever explain why she's an evil dragon. They're just like, "Oh, it's her. She's evil. She's a dragon.
Right.
We gotta kill her.
The immaculate one,
because she's the church."
Right.
And then there's the war, and then it's like the 5-year gap is basically like, oh, there's a stalemate in the war. That's how they sell it. While Byleth is mysteriously missing, which also didn't get any explanation.
Yeah, some of the stuff around the time jump, I think, for all houses is a little contrived.
But then it's like, okay, so in order to break the stalemate, we need to break through part of the alliance, and that means we're going to have to fight Claude. So you go fight Claude for 2 missions and kill him. And and then basically all you get out of that is like, yeah, he was like, Claude was politicking and trying to keep the alliance neutral in the war, and then we ran in.
So we fought him,
and he sacrificed himself to keep the rest of the alliance safe. And then they don't really do anything else with that.
Great.
And then you run into the kingdom, which is where Rhea has retreated to. She and Dimitri are palled up at this point.
Is Dimitri is he
didn't seem insane to me. He just seemed like angry, I guess. Like he was always just he wasn't
screaming about murdering everything in his sight.
I mean, not really that I remember.
Interesting.
I kind of wonder how because in the Blue Lion route, I mean, he discovers that Edelgard is the Flame Emperor and that she might have had, which she denies vehemently, but she also is rubbing elbows with people who are basically bragging about the tragedy of Duskur. So he sees that then, you disappear, he gets thrown into prison, Dedue is presumed dead, breaking him out, and he kind of, he has a lot more reason, I think, in that route to lose it. So yeah, I don't know if he would be quite as yeah,
because I don't think he ended up in prison or anything in my route. He just kind of retreated with Rhea when Edelgard took over the monastery. And then they basically, Edelgard's army just kind of marches into the kingdom and kills everybody. and so the final boss is just against Rhea in her dragon form, and all the like church people are with her at that point. You've already killed Dimitri and Dedue and all them on the way there. So like it really was just like a fairly straightforward war story. But then the really bizarre part to me was that all during part 2, Edelgard's on her warpath and everybody else is behind her, and Hubert is like her strategist, so he's always, in these meetings talking about what you're going to do next. But then he always is like pulling Byleth aside and being like, when this war is over, we really got to deal with those that slither in the dark.
Right.
And I'm looking into them, and we're going to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And then
so like it feels like there should be 4 chapters added on to that campaign where you deal with those people.
Yes, especially since those chapters were already in your route.
Yeah. Like it would have been pretty easy to take basically those same maps that I did, those 2 maps at the end, and put them at the end of yours and like write some new story around it. Like they wouldn't even have to design new gameplay scenarios.
Yeah, but instead, literally you kill Rhea and then you get like some nice artwork of like victorious looking Edelgard and like exposition saying, and then Edelgard led Fodlan into an era of peace, and they hunted down those who slithered in the dark and destroyed them.
That's such a bummer. That almost
like
sounds,
what?
That almost feels like they ran out of development time, kind of.
Yeah, that is literally what it felt like.
I kind of wonder, I mean, I guess, like, the goal was not to be like, oh, you made the wrong decision, like, the, bad end, like, the Church of Ceres are actually the good guys.
Right.
But no,
that's wild.
More like what you said.
The only reason I can think of, other than they just didn't have enough time, that they would have done that is if they wanted to keep the final like fight of each route distinct. So like if they didn't want 2 routes to fight Nemesis, then
I could see that, but
that's the only real reason I can think. But even with that, like, because I had a nice final cutscene, and I think Ryan did too. Like, so like it's just weird that like you just got some still images and text.
Yeah, it was super bizarre.
And is also 4 less chapters.
Because
I think the church route, so I read a little bit of the church route, and so the final boss of that route is also Rhea in dragon form. So apparently, like, you kill, I think I got the sense that one was mostly a straightforward war thing as well, with fighting Edelgard.
Weird.
But then after you kill Edelgard, apparently, like, Rhea goes crazy and turns into a dragon, and like she basically just goes insane.
Yeah,
and like loses control of herself in a way, and you have to like put her down, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't
very strange.
I didn't say this at all in mine, but instead of Dimitri going insane, it was definitely Rhea was just like a complete nut job for all of part 2.
Yeah, I could see that. I think you get some of the story dumps in that church route that I got of like all the history of the relics and the blood and stuff.
Right.
One of the things that did disappoint me about my route is like I didn't, like, me personally, the player, did not trust Rhea really any more than I trusted Edelgard.
I mean, I feel like even in part 1, she was pretty untrustworthy.
Yeah, she was pretty shady. So like, it's a little, I mean, I don't know how they would have done this. Like, I don't know what the answer is here, but I find it a little strange that like you immediately have to basically be allied with the church.
Yeah.
as the Golden Deer and presumably also as the Blue Lions. Like you just kind of like everyone but the Edelgard root is allied with the church.
It's interesting because I'm kind of with you, and I mean, you know, Geralt obviously didn't trust Rhea. Like that's like a whole theme of the story.
Mhm.
And Claude even mentions a lot in the first part of like Rhea's keeping secrets. I know she is. I don't know what she's up to. Like he even kind of has some of those lines.
Yeah, like, but in the Blue Lions route, like, because Rhea is, you know, she turns into a dragon, but it's like kidnapped, or, you know, she's kind of defeated and goes missing, and it's basically, you don't know 100% for sure, but you're pretty positive that she's in the Imperial capital. And that turns out to be the case. But yeah, so she's like totally missing.
Yeah, that's how it is for me too.
In the whole Blue Lions route. So like really like you take over as the archbishop, like as the acting archbishop of the church, like because yeah, like I guess she kind of like put you in that role. So yeah, like you become like sort of the head of the Church of Saros in the Blue Lion route. So in some ways I guess they try to play it, and I think it works fairly well, is like you as the church of like the lead of the Church of Saros are allied with Dimitri, who is kind of like your old student.
Right.
And yeah, I do like the way that, I mean, I think they might have gone a little far in his like madness, and maybe that was kind of like intentional, but yeah, I do like the way that, yeah, for part of the, or for part of part 2, you're basically, it feels like you're trying to, you know, you're basically following along with what Dimitri wants to do, trying to keep him from getting himself killed. He's like, nice. I'm going to march on the capital, and they're like, you know, I'm going to march on the empire, and they're like, Ferdiad's kind of in bad shape right now, and they could use your help. And he's like, Edelgard's not in that direction. Like, we're going to the Empire, and everybody's like, well, I don't know, but I guess like we'll try and help you. And then they actually have these little logistics conversations about how it's like going to be these desperate battles because like they don't have soldiers, like they don't have supplies, like
yeah.
So I mean, you know, they kind of create this fantasy of this like desperate war. Pretty well, but yeah, the church is, it kind of feels like you've taken over as acting for the church, and like, yeah, Rhea's kind of not even a part of it, other than she's missing and the knights want to find her.
Yeah. So I do have one, so I'm going to run through, we're getting short on time here. I want to run through a few quick things and try and have short answers on these. Kind of following up on that point, one thing I want to ask Nate real quick is, so like for me, and I assume for Ryan as well, I just inherently got a lot of the church people in my group, like Catherine and Shamir and Cyril and Alois, like all those people. And I'm assuming you got none of those people.
I had Flame before...
And I assume she left once you stuck with Edelgard.
Yes, she left.
Yeah. Well, I guess once you stuck with Edelgard, did you have any church people after that point?
No.
Yeah. So like when I was fighting against Black Eagles, they had all these other named commanders that I had not seen in the first half of the game. So my curiosity is, did they give you other generals? Like did they give you other characters that you could deploy in your army?
No.
So were you literally limited to, because each of the house has 8 people, were you literally limited to those 8 Black Eagles people plus anyone you recruited?
Yeah.
There was no one outside of that? That's kind of bold.
I don't think so. I can't think of anybody that wouldn't have been. Because like I definitely used my core 8, and then I had a few recruits. Like I had Sylvain and Ingrid and Ignatz.
That's crazy.
Because I had so many church characters. Like and then I recruited 3 or 4 people. So like I just had tons of characters.
Yeah, and the final battle against Rhea was kind of tough, where most of the game had been really stupidly easy.
Yeah.
But then
my final battle was really pretty hard, actually.
It was kind of tough because it was like Catherine and Gilbert and
Right.
and
Alois.
Cyril and all of them were like piled up around Rhea in dragon form, and they were all really strong.
Yeah.
I actually didn't get. I got Gilbert, and I had recruited Shamir. But other than that, I didn't get any additional, any of the other church members after the time jump.
Yeah, I didn't get any more after the time jump either, but before the time jump, I got a good number. Gilbert was one I never got, but I think everyone, like I got Shamir, Cyril, Catherine, Alois, Flane.
Did you recruit them, or did they join you for free?
Seteth.
I got Seteth as well.
Yeah, kind of both. Like I technically like talked to them and hit the recruit option, but all of them, I looked this up later, like they're just based on story progress. So like if you just say recruit, once you reach the right part in the story, they recruit. So they're not like the other house members where you have to like get up a certain stat or certain support or whatever. They just join automatically. So it's like they're kind of just given to you, even though I think you have to technically go talk to them and say recruit.
Okay. Because I didn't try recruiting anyone except Shamir, and she did join me.
Yeah, I'm 99% because I looked this up later. I'm 99% sure most, if not all, of those church people just join based on story progress.
I think Gilbert and Seteth. So I didn't try to recruit them, but they joined as part of the story after the time skip.
Yeah, Seteth and or Flane are the ones that might have just joined automatically.
I do think, now that I'm thinking about it more and looking at the list of characters, I do think I had Shamir with me the whole game.
Okay. Shamir is who I married.
Oh,
really?
I will say my biggest disappointment in terms of characters, I feel like given my route, I should have been able to recruit the Death Knight.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And there was no such option.
Yeah.
Did he like show up as like an ally?
No, there was, I think, one mission where he showed up as randomly.
Yeah. That guy cracked me up. So, all right. I want to take about like 1 or 2 minutes per person and just talk about some of your favorite characters that you used were. So let's start with Ryan.
Is this gameplay or is this support?
Both, like whichever you want to focus on.
Oh man.
And don't just pick like 2, maybe 3 characters. Just give a quick shout out because we need to wrap up in a couple minutes.
Yeah, like in terms of support, looking back through dialogue, like, you know, I was looking at the ones whose lines I had kind of taken the most screenshots of because I thought they were funny or interesting. And Sylvain, quite often, like he had a lot of funny lines.
Yeah.
And gameplay wise, he actually turned into less of a goober.
All right, well, that's...
you know, obviously I liked Lysithea. Petra always cracked me up. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like... I liked Ingrid, and she was really strong. I think she just kind of has this like down-to-earth storyline that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I recruited and used, because I didn't have a great Pegasus Knight character in my house, so I actually did recruit her and use her for that because she seems kind of tailored for that.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, I liked most of the characters. I think I kind of dropped Gilbert and Dudu, partly because I think this is a Fire Emblem which is not kind to like the knight archetype.
Right.
Sort of like Echoes, or is that right? Echoes? Yeah, Echoes was sort of similar in a way. But yeah. I could certainly go on. I mean, I thought Annette was funny. Ash liked chivalry. That was kind of his thing, which was pretty neat.
I mean,
Felix always wanted to fight.
Yeah.
I
Felix
thought
seemed like kind of a jerk.
Flane was hilarious. Like she has some funny things about like cooking and about like trying to be mature and independent. after being like coddled for so long. So yeah, I mean, I definitely go on and on about. I like pretty much all of the characters, at least in terms of flavor.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent most of the spoiler cast talking about like kind of the bigger plot and how the the different routes play out. But I feel like we could have another 2-hour spoiler cast just talking about the large cast of characters. So Nate, what are some of your favorites from what you played?
I really do like all the Black Eagles characters. I feel like
did Bernadetta ever get some cake?
She always said she would always say like, I'm not eating cake in her room.
Lysithea had the funniest comments about cake.
Yeah.
Lysithea is a cake fiend.
Casper and Bernadetta had great support scenes where he would just pick her up and like relocate her to somewhere else in the monastery to like get her out to somewhere new. So she would just be like, you know, frantic about whatever she's worried about. Like she's fixated on her social anxiety, and he would just like run up and like grab her and be like, "We're going to the tower." They were just super goofy.
Nice.
Ferdinand, I thought, had a really good like growth throughout the game. From just like super naive noble to like somebody who kind of tried to, you know, be responsible and not in like a showy way, but like actually accept some responsibility for the position he has.
Yeah, I think some of the like this is something I like about this game that I think it does better than a lot of the other Fire Emblem games is more than just like having, I mean, it does have the really charming character quirks that it plays off in funny, goofy scenes. Like that stuff's still all great. But I think they show some real genuine character growth through multiple support. Like some characters have multiple kind of growth plot lines. And I think some of the most effective ones for me were the characters like Ferdinand, because my kind of equivalent to Ferdinand was Lawrence, who just kind of had to stick up his butt at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And like they kind of have a real change of heart, like without necessarily changing their entire person. They just kind of like learn how to, you know, behave better in their position and treat others better.
Yeah. And him and Dorothea's conversations were always good, and they actually ended up getting married in my route, which was funny.
Nice. That's hilarious.
Most of those like relationship for me were very odd.
Oh, same here.
Yeah. So I'm looking. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I can't remember most of them off the top of my head at this point, but there were some very oddball ones for sure.
Yeah, so in mine, I see a couple that I remember: Ash and Petra, Seteth and Ingrid, and then you know maybe not marriage, but like they had Felix and Sylvain had like a shared ending story, and like Mercedes and Annette and Dudu and Dimitri, just like you had some that were like yeah. Looked like you were gonna have a guy and a girl get married, and then they had all these they went all these other directions.
Yeah, Claude and Ingrid married in my game. I thought that was weird.
Wow.
Yeah, cross house marriage there. Yes. So I Lysithea was on the battlefield. Lysithea was by far my all-star. Like regularly I'd come up against people where like nobody else could hurt, and then she would one-shot them.
Yeah.
Like, well, like every time I fought the Death Knight, it's like nobody else will deal damage and they'll die in a single counterattack, but Lysithea will just deal 70 damage in one shot when he has 40 health or something. Like just like not even close. The final boss Nemesis had 107 health, and like 2/3 of my people did 0 damage. And then a couple people like Byleth and Claude and Cyril, like some of my other stronger characters, would deal like 20 or 30. And Lysithea dealt 60 something. And it's like, what is with this? So like I basically used the other people to like chip him down, and then Lysithea, because he would counterattack and kill her because she's like a glass cannon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I had other people chip him down to under the 65 or whatever damage she would do, and then for her to finish. But yeah, she was funny, as Ryan mentioned in her other scenes too. Hilda scenes always cracked me up because her whole deal is she's lazy. She is the laziest person on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So all of her supports start out with her basically like weaseling her way into convincing other people to do her work for her. and then a lot of those scenes like end up her maturing and like, you know, showing her positive qualities and like her end up helping other people out. So like that was really good, but she constantly cracked me up. Claude and Petra are two other characters that I liked a lot. Petra, obviously I recruited, but yeah, like Ryan had said earlier, her dialogue cracked me up.
Yeah. She's like, I have understanding.
Yeah, she was hilarious.
Finding and murdering is my specialness.
And Claude, I ended up like, despite, you know, he's the house leader and he was generally a friendly dude, but I really liked him as the game went on. Like just his supports with everyone else were like, he's a cool dude. And incredibly, Ryan mentioned his special bow. Like he was also a powerhouse on the battlefield.
Yeah, it is interesting because I recruited Lysithea pretty early. She was one of my first recruits, and she probably wasn't quite as insane as you were describing, but she still, yeah, I could not figure out. I mean, her growth was pretty much all magic.
Yeah.
Every level she got magic, but it seems like maybe because she was using dark magic or something. Yeah, it was just crazy sometimes. She would like swoop in and like smack something for like 60 damage or 60 plus damage.
Yeah, it's just insane. Yeah, I think she just has access to so many good spells that other people don't have access to. I think that's part of it, in addition to her magic just being through the roof.
Yeah, because other characters had almost as high. Like my Flane and Mercedes had like maybe within 5 points or so, but they just did not hit that hard most of the time.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. We've been going for a while. I guess, does anyone have any final thoughts? Just, I guess, quick final impressions of the game. Like, did you guys? I mean, sounds like you both enjoyed it overall. Nate may be a little bummed with kind of how you're wrapped up story wise, but it sounds like otherwise you both enjoyed the game for the most part.
Yeah, for me personally, I definitely enjoyed it. I think it was a little easy. I think part of it was so many routes, and you know, it's not a curated Fire Emblem like a Fate's Conquest, of course, but and I think Nate had touched on this, and you said it as well. It was maybe a little on the easy side, but it'll be curious to see if they've bumped that up with the new difficulty. And the pacing sometimes threw me off a bit, like figuring out when to grind. I think I probably spent too much time grinding, especially in the first half. But other than that, yeah, I really liked the story. I think there were a lot of interesting threads, and one of the things I kind of wanted in this podcast was just to kind of see how some of the other story threads pulled and how some of the other characters developed. Because there are also some threads we didn't even talk about, like you know, Byleth and Sothis, and you know, some of the stuff going on there that it felt like they could have explored a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what about you, Nate? Where do you kind of settle on this one?
I pretty mixed overall, I think, on this one for me. I really like a lot of what they do with the world building and characters and all the different factions and houses and how that all plays together. I think that stuff is just really, really neat. I didn't love playing the game for the most part, but you know, it's probably partially me being not as into tactics games, but I just found it very easy, very bland to play most of the time. But you know, I like a lot of the character stuff, like I said.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I guess we should also like
say
that like you've never been the biggest Fire Emblem fan.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what I'm saying. This isn't really necessarily my favorite style of game to begin with, but
do you think do you compare it well to the other Fire Emblems you've played, or?
I think so. I think really like I definitely didn't hate it. Probably the thing that made me end up as mixed as I did was just the length and how easy it is.
Yeah.
It just felt like a slog.
Yeah, and you did play, I mean, this is not your fault necessarily, like, but you did play it on normal. I'm guessing Ryan played it on hard. I played it on hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played it on normal, and it was just a cakewalk.
Yeah. And it's a bummer you couldn't bump it up.
Yeah, they don't let you change it up after that you start the game.
Yeah. I mean, hard, like even on hard, it was easier, I feel like, than most previous Fire Emblem games. But the last, like, I'll say fourth of the campaign, like, did get challenging enough that I at least had to, like, be careful and had to use Divine Pulse a couple times. Like, it wasn't just a cakewalk. Like, I did have to, you know, think and, like, you know, take into account all of the Fire Emblem tactical considerations you would normally think of.
Yeah.
And like, so that was satisfying, but the first half of the game was definitely, even on hard, was very easy.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I do think there's some potential there, and, you know, maybe with the new difficulty they've done this, I don't know, but, you know, I remember there being some plays where it's like, you know, hey, I really need to run in here and like use a gambit and like stop everybody and like pull my guy back. And they have that whole layer that in a more challenging difficulty they could probably take advantage of. But yeah. I agree that up until the end of part 2, even on hard, and that's probably partly because of the way they've structured the monastery sim type stuff.
Yeah.
They want to make it very open-ended and give players time to explore and recruit whoever they want.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, we don't need to get into game mechanics stuff here, and I don't want to bash it for the stuff that didn't work for me, because I do think this game does a lot of neat stuff, both thematically and some of it mechanically, but for the most part, playing it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, and that's fair. I really enjoyed playing it. Like, I got really... This game, like, invaded my brain in a weird way. Couldn't stop thinking about it. And I think for me, the way, like, this to me almost
How many tea
like,
parties did you have, Flex?
Oh, so many tea parties.
What was your favorite blend?
Oh, I don't know. And I think for me, like, I feel like they've been trying to do this for the past couple of Fire Emblem games, and I think the monastery setting and the school setting, and like that you're instructing your students and all of that way that the students were developing, I think, like, finally hit on a way that worked for me of getting attached to your characters more, and like,
right,
because they've had the skills systems and like some, like, because like the older Fire Emblem games were a lot more linear in both the story progression and the character progression, and they've been branching out more in the past couple of games with like more divergent class options, skill options and stuff. And I feel like for me, the school setting and the way you go through the calendar and choose how to spend your time, I think made that stuff click for me a lot more, and made it like, it just felt like a more natural way to go for this kind of game. And I think it also like gave a lot more breathing room to get connected to the characters, because I mean, you could argue maybe the game's too long, but I think like there's just a lot more ways and time to interact with those characters.
Yeah.
And I think that helped contribute to what I think all of us liked, which is the character building and the world building, and like a lot of those narrative trappings for me worked way better than they have a lot in the Fire Emblem games before. And I think those structural changes contribute to that. And I think that made for a stronger marrying of the mechanical stuff and the narrative stuff in a way that really clicked for me. I think there's definitely some difficulty balance issues and maybe some parts of the story where it drags a little bit. So like spacing cleanup. Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned, some of the like big story beats, they didn't quite write as well as they could have. So definitely not a perfect game by any stretch, but I think like, especially when you think about the way previous Fire Emblem games have handled some of this, like I think they've made a more ambitious game here that like in a way kind of hits on what I feel like Fire Emblem's always tried to do, but has never really found a way to quite like have that world and character building. And I think they've gotten much, like I think this was a big step in the right direction. Even if some of the execution could use a little cleanup.
Yeah, the social simulator is a kind of a pretty good fit, I think, for the series. I mean, I don't hope they do it for every game because, like,
makes for a long game.
Yeah, it's a really long game. I'm sure it's a lot of development time for them, and I also like some of the, like, like Conquest, for example, having that very tightly balanced campaign, or Echoes having like a kind of linear but really interesting story. I like that they, maybe every few iterations, or they could experiment with some leaner mechanics like this.
Because my favorite Fire Emblems before this have been, like Conquest style, very linear, hyper focused on the map design and tactical play. And I think with this game ends up being more open-ended, and how you create your characters kind of reduces that a little bit. But I think it adds so much to the character building and world building. So it's kind of a trade-off. So there could be room, to kind of what you were saying, Ryan, like have some of both, like some games be one style, some games be another. Ideally, it'd be nice if they could have all of it, but that's probably a really hard line to walk. But anyway, we've been talking for a while. At least one of us needs to go to bed. So we're going to wrap up this podcast, and hopefully anyone who listens to this enjoys our talk. I have certainly enjoyed talking about all the details of Fire Emblem Three Houses, and thank you guys for joining me and having this chat.
Absolutely.
And we are going to sign off. Say goodnight to everyone out there. You've been listening to a Fire Emblem Three Houses spoiler cast with Flex, Ryan, and Nate. And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.